To that same sort of end, I think it's interesting, and this is sort of way afield of what we would normally talk about, but T-Mobile announced a deal with New York City on their on a contract for first responders, and you thought there was an interesting sort of CIO angle here. So why don't you tee this one up?
Yes. So in New York City, they had been doing an RFP for their 911 services. Obviously, this is important, being able to take 911 calls and requests from the 10 million people in New York City and being able to make sure those calls go through. This has traditionally been a contract owned by AT&T, but T-Mobile came in and said, "We're going to shift over your 911 service from 4G to 5G. And more importantly, we're going to do this thing called network slicing, where we're going to give you a preferred access to the network, basically cut out, call it kind of like a virtualization of the network. We're going to cut out a section of the network and assign that specifically to 911 services." And New York City said, "Hey, that sounds great. Better performance, cheaper. And we frankly have part of the network that nobody else has access to. Sign us up." So, in and of itself, I think that's great. But I do wonder what this means for network services in general, where we have been used to a net neutral or net neutrality type of approach where we're all pretty much buying the same thing. And now it looks like potentially we can start buying preferential access to a network, or we can or vice versa, carriers can start uh, pricing app access differently on networks.
So I think it's interesting. This obviously is their cellular, or what we used to call cellular service.
Mhm.
But I think the big question that you're raising is, will this cascade and will we see some of this? Because we can just as easily, in fact, I would argue more easily, do this in the traditional sort of internet space, connectivity space. And I think this has been a very hot topic for a lot of folks. I have never been horribly worried about net neutrality, mostly because I think the actual operationalization of it in practice, both politically in terms of the minds and the hearts and minds of consumers, as well as technically, there's a whole lot of complication to it and a whole lot of things that go wrong. And I'm a firm believer that organizations tend to pick the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance here is give me a pipe and don't worry about what's on it. So we'll see. I think that, this is an example. I'm not sure if it's a replicable example, but it's an example that this is the case where the technical capabilities were something that they could overcome and leverage to create a market advantage. So I think it'll be interesting. I know back in the day, I'm dating myself, but I bought dark fiber back prior to the internet existing, for that very reason. It was from a carrier, and I bought dark fiber to connect my hospitals and my major facilities, because I wanted to create a competitive advantage over my competitors who were using the publicly available connections. So, it makes sense. I understand it, but I think there's a lot of complication to it. So we'll have to see how if this plays out in any meaningful way beyond this particular contract.
Yeah, in I wonder how it will work out in terms of agentic AI. Perhaps a company like Salesforce wanting to provide mobile AI services and using cellular. Perhaps that might be a thing. Obviously, streaming services, something like Netflix. Netflix will want preferred access, if possible, for something like cellular services. And so I can see niche cases. I don't think this is necessarily a widespread enterprise concern yet, but I do think it's something to consider if you've got millions of mobile users. So that's only a handful of you out there.